Hey everyone, Jim here, and in this video, I'm going to show you how to set up VMware Workstation Pro with Windows 11. If you like this video and like to see more, please feel free to like this video, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and leave a comment. If you have any other videos you want to see, or if you have any questions, put them in there. I'll keep an eye on the comment section, and I'm happy to help you out however I can. So let's get started. Now, before we get started, I did want to mention that there are a number of virtualization products that exist out there, such as VirtualBox, Hyper-V, and more, but VMware Workstation is kind of just my personal preference. And I like VMware Workstation a lot because you can also connect off to remote VMware environments as well. So if you are running any virtual machines in a data center or a cloud environment, you can use it as a virtual kind of remote console to connect to them, configure them, and manage your virtual machines and data centers, which is super convenient. So to get to VMware Workstation Pro, just go ahead and download it, and you're going to get to the VMware product page. Now, this Pro version is a paid version. It's a couple $100. I think it's totally worth it. You can do a lot of really cool things with it. But if you are looking for the free version of VMware Workstation, there is this thing known as VMware Player. VMware Player is great, but you can generally only run one virtual machine at a time. You can't take snapshots. And you can't connect off to remote VMware environments. So it's great if you just need to run something once or one at a time, but if you're looking for more advanced features, I would look towards VMware Workstation Pro, or maybe just a different product, maybe use VirtualBox or something else instead. So go ahead and search for VMware Workstation Pro or VMware Workstation Download, and you will eventually come across a page for the free trial. So let me scroll down. Yep, here I am, the VMware Workstation Pro download page. Just click download now. This will give you a free 30-day trial. So if you just want to play around with it, 30 days for free, and it works out pretty well. So this installer is pretty straightforward. Once it launches, you're just going to start it. And for the most part, you're going to be able to click next, 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 accept all the terms, and just have it go through the process. And it's not going to be an issue. The speed at which this installation takes place is going to be highly dependent on the speed of the computer you're running this on. My computer I'm using this right now is fairly quick, so it shouldn't take too long. So I'm going to click Next, Accept, and Next. And I'm going to click Next again, but I did want to talk just a second about this enhanced keyboard driver. If you're wondering if you should select this checkbox or not, number one, if you do select it, your computer is going to have to reboot before you can use VMware. And number two, most people probably don't need to check this checkbox. If you're in America and you have a regular English style keyboard, you don't really need to do this. This checkbox primarily installs some additional drivers to handle international keyboards better. And the other thing that's kind of nice as well is it does improve the functionality. If you were to do a Control-Alt-Delete within a VM, it would register in that VM rather than on your actual host computer. So it can improve some of those things. But for the most part, don't select it. Click Next. Next, and install. And again, this will just take a minute or 2 or 3 to complete, again, depending on the speed of your computer. So in addition to having this virtualization software installed on our computer, the other thing we're going to have to get is an operating system. Now in this video, I'll cover how to set up and install Windows, and other videos I might eventually show you to do Linux and Kali Linux and other fun things. We're going to stick with the basics for now. And we're actually going to do Windows 11, and I have never set up a Windows 11 virtual machine before, so this will be kind of a fun test to do on camera here. So to download Windows 11, just Google Windows 11 download, and Microsoft thankfully has published their media, their actual ISO media to download and install Windows, which is awesome. And you want to download this disk image. It's known as a .iso file. So feel free to select Windows 11 on this page and click download. And then from here, choose your language of choice. I speak English, so we're going to go like that. And, okay, verify your download, 64-bit download, and there it goes. This ISO file is essentially a virtual DVD. Most modern computers nowadays, they don't have DVD drives in them where you can put physical disks. So what they'll do is they'll give you this virtual DVD that you could either burn to a blank DVD and put it in a computer if your computer actually had a DVD drive, or more likely you could either use it to set up a virtual machine or essentially mount it or burn it to a USB flash drive or thumb drive, and you can install it on a computer that way. This file is relatively large. It's about 5 or 6 gigabytes in size. So once again, depending on the speed of your computer and your network, this could take some time to complete. I have a relatively fast network connection and it's already finished, but if you have DSL or a slower broadband connection, it could take 15 minutes, even up to, an hour or so. Okay, so let me see how the installation is doing. So yeah, it looks like VMware Workstation is installed. At this point, you can license it if you have a product key, or you can just click Finish if you want to use the free trial. I'll click Finish. I had previously licensed it, so I'm assuming it's going to hold. It does want me to restart it, even though I didn't check that checkbox. What the heck? I'm going to say no to restart later. And I'll try launching VMware, and we'll see if it actually loads. So yeah, there we go. It's launched. If it does ask you to restart it before launching it, there's no harm in doing that. I'm just impatient, so, I decided just to try launching it. Okay. So from within here, you're going to see I've used VMware before. I have some old virtual machines I was playing around with earlier in the week. I'm just going to leave those be, but by default, there's nothing in here. It's really not that difficult to set up a virtual machine. Getting it to run is kind of a different story. So I'll walk you through it and we'll see how it goes. Again, this is the first time I've ever tried to do Windows 11. There's going to be a little bit more setup involved, and I honestly have no idea if it's going to work or if it's going to go without issue. So I'm going to go ahead and click this Create New Virtual Machine button. Go ahead and say Typical and select Next. At this point, you could either point to like a physical drive you have in your computer. If you have a physical CD put in it, you can do that. But I'm going to use the installer image, which is that ISO file. And I had that downloaded into my downloads. And I'm going to select it from here. And I'm going to click Next. I'm going to make sure that it says Microsoft Windows. And as you'll notice, VMware added this label Windows 10 and later. So I'm going to go ahead and select that one because this is Windows 11. And click Next. I'm going to give my virtual machine a name, call it Windows 11 Test. And now, probably most importantly, through this process, you need to make sure you specify a location to save it. By default, when you set up a virtual machine, it's going to save it in your Documents folder within virtual machines. For most of you, that might be fine, but if you're like me and you have a very small solid state for your operating system, and then maybe a large data drive for your large files, you might want to think about changing this because most virtual machines are going to be at least 20 gigabytes in size, if not larger, and they're going to take up a considerable amount of space. So I want to make sure this is on my data drive. So I'm actually going to click Browse, and I'm going to go into my data drive, into virtual machines, and I'm going to put it in here. So now I'm going to click Next, and I'm going to leave the minimum disk size alone. The maximum disk size alone. Generally, I wouldn't recommend changing this unless you had a specific purpose in mind. If you change this to anything less than 60 gigabytes, and Windows might install fine, or it might run out of room. So I'd keep it kind of as is. And of course, if you know you're going to need more space, feel free to allocate it at this time. Now you have the option either split the virtual disks into multiple files or split it into just one giant file. My advice, keep it the multiple smaller files. If you ever need to relocate this virtual machine or move it onto an external flash drive or anything else, it's just going to make moving it it'll make moving it easier and more of an enjoyable experience. If you have a giant file and it crapping over halfway through, you're going to have to restart that whole thing again. It can be super frustrating. Smaller files, if it messes up or craps out halfway through, you just pick off where you left off. Much easier to do. And you might be tempted to click Finish, but at this point, you really want to make sure you click Customize Hardware. There's a few reasons for that. Number one, Windows 11 requires a lot of, I would say, security and encryption technologies that aren't configured by default in a VMware Workstation. And probably number two, this is equally as important if you're working with any operating system. By default, it's going to give you 2 gigabytes of RAM and 2 vCPUs allocated. If you've ever tried to run Windows 10 or 11 with 2 gigabytes of RAM, you'll probably know it's a pretty miserable experience. It's just such a slow computer to run. And running it in a virtual machine with 2 gigabytes of RAM is no different. You'll have that really terrible experience. Ideally, I would say bump this up to 8 if you can. And 16 would be even better. My host computer here has 32 gigabytes of memory. So I'll do 16. I'm only going to be running this one virtual machine, and there's no harm in bumping it up. Any of these settings, with the exception of your hard drive, are easy to adjust after the fact. So if you decide later on you want to come back and give it more memory, or maybe you realize you've given it too much and you want to scale it back. Totally fine to do. You're not going to run into any issues with that. Same thing with the processors. 2 processor cores would probably be okay, but I still think it'd be kind of crawling. I prefer to have at least 4. Now, there's 2 different ways you can increase the number of cores. You can either say I want 4 individual virtual processors, each with 1 core each, and that gets you to the 4 total cores. Or you could say I want 1 processor with 4 cores. Or you could say I want 2 processors with 2 cores each. What you choose to do, it doesn't really matter, especially in the case of what we're doing in this video, but I would say by far and large, it doesn't matter. But if you wanted to set this up to run a specific piece of software, maybe you're running kind of a unique operating system, sometimes there are limits to the number of cores an OS will support or the number of processors an OS, also known as an operating system, will support. So just be mindful of that. I'll just go 2 and 2, pretty easy and straightforward. Okay, so at this point, if this was Windows 10, you could close and finish and you would be done. However, Windows 11 is not going to work, at least based off of the reading that I've done. What we actually need to do is we need to first off enable encryption on this virtual machine. So I'm going to go in here under options. I'm going to find encryption. All right, and I found it. It's under actually access control. Where did that go? Right here. And we need to click encrypt. And we need to make a password for this. So I'm going to go ahead and set a password. You can choose one of your own. And then you might be thinking, great, we're all good to go. But you also want to make sure that under this advanced option at the bottom of options, it is selected to set to UEFI and you select enable secure boot. Very important for Windows 11. Now you might be thinking you're good to go, but the way this works is you also need to add into this thing known as TPM. So most modern computers, if you buy a laptop, it's going to be a little microchip essentially soldered onto the motherboard. And if you are buying or building a desktop computer, this could be a little module you literally slide onto the motherboard. But because this is a virtual machine, we actually have to add in this piece of hardware in the virtual sense. So I'm back under the hardware tab, and I clicked on add, and I'm going to select TPM. It stands for Trusted Platform Module. This essentially stores some keys and other cryptographic information, so when your computer boots, it'll automatically unlock the hard drive for you that is typically encrypted at rest when it's turned off and powered off. So click Finish, click OK, and now the moment of truth. Let's hit the power button and we'll see what happens. Okay, all right. So we got an error message here, and that's okay. We can fix this. So depending on how old your computer is and what processor is installed in it, and just depending on your computer settings, you may or may not be able to run a virtual machine. So in general, my advice is if you don't have at least 8 gigabytes of memory and a 4-core CPU system with 100 gigabytes of free space, you're probably not going to be able to run a virtual machine. It's just going to run so slow even if you can get it to boot. But if you have a newer computer, let's say it's a budget computer, you bought it brand new from Best Buy or Amazon or from wherever. Some of the very low-end processors, specifically, Intel Celeron and the very low-powered ones, Intel Atom, I believe, maybe, they actually don't support virtualization. It's not possible to run a VMware Workstation or VirtualBox or Hyper-V on those CPUs. It's just not supported. And with most other computers, if you have a newer computer that works pretty well, and if you're having issues starting a VM, it's probably because that inside of your BIOS, that option is just turned off. For whatever reason, some computer manufacturers will turn that off by default for security reasons. They turn it off so you don't accidentally run a VM. So to turn this on, you have to boot into your computer BIOS and find either the option for AMD-V or Intel VTX. And this is going to depend on, number one, what type of processor you have installed in your system. If you have an Intel processor, typically you'll have to find the Intel VTX option. And if you have an AMD processor like I do, you have to find the AMD-V option. Now, each computer manufacturer, the BIOS, where you can actually go in and change this, is going to be completely different. So if you have a Dell computer, it's going to look completely different than if you have an HP computer, than if you have a computer you built yourself, such as in my case. So my recommendation would be is if you're not sure where to find this option or how to get into your BIOS to find the option, do a little bit of Googling. So I have an MSI Unity motherboard installed on my desktop computer over here. I would Google, AMD Unity and the specific model number, how to enable AMD-V. If you have an Intel computer, you might want to Google how to enable Intel VTX with, I'll just give an example of a computer model, a Dell Latitude 7400. And there'll be some instructions out there. This is a common setting to change. So once you make that setting change and you come back in here, you should be able to hit that power button. I flipped off the setting here just to show you what it looks like, that error screen you get. So I'm actually going to pause this recording, restart my computer, turn the setting on, and then I'll jump back into this video and we'll get the rest of this installation underway. All right, so I'm back and my computer has restarted. I've relaunched VMware Workstation and have selected my Windows 11 test VM. And the first thing you'll notice is that it's asking me for a password. Now, this is the password I had set when I originally had set this VM to be encrypted. So I'm entering that in now. I'm going to click continue. And now it's unlocked it. So now, hypothetically, that I've gone into my BIOS, I found an enabled option for AMD-V. I'm going to go ahead and click power on this virtual machine. And hypothetically, I'm going to click OK, and it's going to work. Now it says press any key to boot from the CD or DVD, and then that went away. When you install a Windows operating system, it'll only give you a few moments to start the installation. And if you miss it, it's going to move on to the next boot option. So it says now it says that it's timed out, booting off the EFI network. And what essentially happened is it tried to boot off the CD, and because I didn't hit any key on my keyboard, I didn't think I wanted to start Windows. And just moved on to the next boot method, which was booting off of the network. And since there was there's nothing to boot off on the network, it eventually timed out. And that's what you see here. Now to fix this, if it doesn't boot off right away, it's pretty easy. You can just right click power and say reset. And you can click reset, click into the console here and start tapping away on your keyboard, and you'll probably be able to get it to boot. Now, if you've tried this for a few times and you keep missing it and you're like, oh, it's not working, again, don't panic. What you can do is just right click and say power off this VM. And then under the VM menu here, you can say power onto firmware. And this will boot you into the BIOS or the configuration area of this virtual machine. And you can just go down and actually using your keyboard, you can select CD-ROMs. You hit the enter key on your keyboard. Now, if you've clicked into that window and you're like, oh crap, my mouse and my cursor is gone. What do I do? How do I get out of this? It's pretty easy to do. You just hit Control and Alt on your keyboard and that will free it. So you can get back to your host computer. So when I've clicked into it, it's locked up. Control and Alt will give it back. So I'm going to navigate to the SATA CD-ROM drive, which is where that ISO file is installed on. I'm going to hit the enter key on my keyboard and the enter key again, just so it actually boots. You have to push any key on the keyboard when that message is showing when you're clicked into the console in order to get it to load the operating system. And this is actually not going to load the operating system, but it's going to load the operating system installer. And this process isn't too bad, although it can be a little bit confusing if it's the first time that you've seen this. So what you want to do is select Next, Install Now, and it's going to have us accept the licensing agreements and a few other things. It's going to ask us for a product key, but honestly, you don't need one if you're just doing this for fun. If you do have a product key and you want to enter it in, you can. But I'm just doing this for fun, just kind of a short-term temporary thing, and I'm going to say I don't have a product key. Now, when you don't have a product key, Windows will nag you to license it and to register it, but if you don't, it's not a big deal, at least for a limited period of time. If it's a few weeks or maybe up to a month, you can run it unactivated and that's okay. But then after that, you do need to supply a product key or it's going to start nagging you more and it eventually might kind of lock you out of the OS. And as you can see too, when you're installing it, you have a number of options you can choose or select from. Generally speaking, if you did enter in a product key on this screen, it would just give you the options that you're licensed for. So you might only see just one or two options. However, since I didn't give it a product key, I want to make sure I select the actual version of Windows 11 that I want to install. And for playing around with this, I'm going to go with Windows 11 Pro. I think sounds pretty good for me. And the most important thing I'm going to mention on this screen is these N versions. The N versions of Windows are designed for the European market, so unless you are in Europe, I'd advise not selecting them. If you did accidentally, though, it's okay. It's not the biggest deal in the world. It's going to have some Europe features, so you're going to have like a browser banner and some other things that are more specific to the European market. So I click next, accept the licensing terms, click next once again. And this is where things really get confusing for a lot of novice users. There's no install button. There's either upgrade or custom. Why can't you just click next? So what you actually want to do is you want to click custom. I personally have never had to click this upgrade button before. Usually when I do, it tells me there's no OS to be upgraded, and then I have to restart my machine and start again. I always want to click custom, and this is actually what you want to do if you're installing a new OS. And from here, in here, you're going to select your virtual hard drive, which is disk 0 or drive 0. You'll see it's 60 gigabytes in size. Click next, and it's going to install. Now, how long this takes is going to be really dependent on how fast your host computer is. I have a relatively new computer. It's about a year old that I built. It has a fast processor, a solid-state hard drive, lots of memory, and I have a decent amount of resources allocated to this VM. I have 16 gigabytes of memory and 4 vCPU. So this installation is going to go pretty quick. I would say this will be done within 5 minutes. Now, if I had a slower computer or an older computer, or if I was running this in a virtual machine where I only allocated 2 gigabytes of RAM or some very minuscule amount of resources, this is going to take a lot longer. I've seen this take upwards of an hour, if not more, so you got to be patient. If it looks like it's frozen, be patient, give it at least an hour to finish, and after an hour, if you don't see any progress, then yeah, there's probably something going on with your system, but it can take a while, just as an FYI. And there's a couple of steps to this. So what's happening now is essentially copying over and staging all the installation files onto the virtual hard disk. And that's kind of phase 1. So it's copying, the 5 gigabytes worth of data off the disk onto the virtual hard drive, and it's starting to decompress and extract some of that stuff out onto the drive that is being freshly partitioned. Then what's going to happen after that is it's going to ask us to restart the computer, and it's actually going to start the configuration process where it's going to have us set up a user account, create a password, choose if you want to join it to an Active Directory environment, and all those other fun things. And generally that step takes a little bit less time than the original copy and extraction of those base OS install files. But all said and done, I think for my computer, we're looking probably around 5, maybe 10 minutes to completely finish this install. Again, though, this is the first time I'm ever doing a Windows 11 virtual machine, so we'll have to see how it goes. Look at that. It was pretty quick. It took about a minute or so to do the copy. I clicked the restart button, but you can also just let it go through and wait 10 seconds and it'll automatically restart. And you might be thinking at this point, great, I'm done and my virtual machine is up and running. But you're going to notice that there's still some additional setup we're going to have to do. And it's almost there. And while this is loading, I did also just want to mention that VMware does have a wizard that can be used for more common operating systems. Windows 11 is fairly common, but it's also really, really new, so VMware hasn't built it in yet for this OS. But if you are setting up Windows 10, Windows 7, even common Linux installations like Ubuntu, there's a wizard that will just walk you through doing all of it, and it's a much smoother and simpler installation process. While it is a little bit easier to do that way, I do enjoy showing this manual method of selecting a hard drive and partitioning it and all this other setup because I think it's a good experience to have. Realistically, if you're using any non-standard operating system like most versions or flavors of Linux, you're going to have to go through this manual method anyways. Or if you're doing a non-traditional Windows OS like some version of Windows Server or something along those lines, you'll also have to go through this manual method. I just wanted to mention it though because occasionally you might see someone else doing a similar demo and it looks like there's a lot less steps. And that's why they went through the wizard way rather than the manual setup and configuration way. Almost done. Just a moment. And again, generally the first few times that your machine's going to reboot, whether it be this virtual machine or if you're actually installing Windows on a physical computer, it's going to take a little bit longer because it's creating a lot of the default directories and folders that are needed for a lot of the processes within the system. So it looks like it's finished booting back up for the first time, so we can select our region, so I'm in the US, so I'll go ahead and select that. It's going to have us create a user account and choose some default preferences, such as keyboard layout. US looks good to me. That's what kind of keyboard I have here at my house. Click skip. For any additional layouts you might want to add in. And again, this is I would say fairly straightforward. You can kind of click next, next, next through it. There's not too much you can get lost in with right here. Sure, so this is nice. It's actually allowing us to select a computer name. And this is one pet peeve I had whenever I did the Windows 10 install. Usually by default, it would generate a random computer name. And then you have to go back in and change it after the fact. So it's nice. It gives you the ability to select a computer name right here from this configuration prompt. Give it a moment to finish catching back up. It's actually restarting. That's interesting. Was not expecting the VM to restart, but that's cool to see. And I suspect now we're going to get back into the menu fairly quick. The second restart is always a little bit faster. So I'm not sure what's going to ask us next. It'll probably be something around creating a user account or allowing Microsoft to see more of the data on here. There's like so many little radio buttons that you can turn on and off to choose like what data you send to Microsoft. And of course, here it is. It really wants you to join this either to a Microsoft account or an Azure Active Directory or a traditional on-premise Active Directory. They really don't want you just to set it up as a standalone. I'm just going to say set up for personal use. And I know I clicked on it. Let's give it another second to come through. There it goes. I'm not going to sign in with my Microsoft account, although you are certainly welcome to if you wish. So I'm going to say no account, create one. Do I have to make an actual Microsoft account, or how do I do this offline? It really wants me to make an attached online Microsoft account. Let me try sign in options. Offline account, and there we go. So I had to select. I'll show you this one more time. When it asks you to sign in to your Microsoft account, if you want to skip this because you don't want a bunch of virtual machines attached to your real Microsoft account, the way to do this is to go into sign in options, click offline account, and then I'm going to click skip for now. And now it's going to let me do a local account, which is what I want. I don't like to have a lot of junk or extra machines attached to my Microsoft account. Make sure you set a password. A lot of people, even if they're just playing around with this temporarily, they don't set a password, and that's a terrible practice. Set a password. Just make sure that it's a secure enough password that it's not going to yell at you. I don't want to set security questions, but it wants us to. I'm just selecting essentially 3 at random and setting them to the same answer as test. Again, not good security, but I'm not a huge fan of security questions anyways. And here are all the privacy radio buttons you can choose to either turn on or off. Of course, by default, they're all on. Sure, why not? I'll accept them. In the real world, I probably would turn some of those off. But this is a demo video, so let's go ahead and we'll give our virtual machine data to the Microsoft. And this is going to be the last slow login. This is known as the first time login. If you've ever used like a public computer before, maybe at like a university or in your office even, the first time you log on to, you might notice that the computer is just really slow. It takes a while for you to log in. But then you come back to that machine the next day or a week later, and the login time is like instant. It's a lot faster. Instead of taking 2 minutes, it takes like 2 seconds. And that's because the first time any user logs onto a system, it's going to copy this default configuration, this default profile from the hard drive and make a second copy of it for your account. And if you have a slower hard drive, this process can take a while. The folder that it copies can be several gigabytes in size. But the next time you log into a computer, let's say you come back the next day, or if you just log off and log back on, it's going to be almost instant because that file was already copied over, that default profile. The next time you try to sign into the computer, it's already going to be there and it's going to put you right into the system. It's going to be fast and speedy. So again, don't be dissuaded if this first login, the setup process does take a while. It does not necessarily mean your virtual machine is going to be slow or have crappy performance. Just give it some patience. Once this is done, you can try restarting your machine, and as you're going to find, it's going to be a lot more snappy, and you're going to be able to get into a lot quicker. So here I am. It's launched Windows 11 with the start button right in the middle, which I'm not currently very crazy about, but I've only been using Windows 11 for about a month now. But here it is. It's Windows 11, and if I go into the system settings, you're going to see that it has all the resources allocated to it that I had provided when I originally had set up the virtual machine. To get to that, I believe it'd be under the About section. And here we go. We got our 2 processors with 4 cores and the 16 gigabytes memory and the 60 gigabyte hard drive. The last thing I want to show you is this thing known as VMware Tools. So what's cool with VMware Tools is if you have a file or a folder on your local computer, like let's say on your desktop, and you want to copy that over to a virtual machine, you can literally just copy and paste. Without this tools installed on the virtual machine, you're not going to be able to copy things back and forth. And that can be both a blessing and a curse. It can be nice if you're using a virtual machine to test any type of security software. Maybe you're playing around with a piece of malware. Maybe you're doing something that's a little more risky. Having VMware Tools not installed will kind of give your environment a little bit more of a sandbox. It gives it a little bit more protection against things hopping from the virtual machine over to your real machine. Now, the disadvantage is if you are constantly copying things between different virtual machines or from your host computer to the virtual machine, it's not going to work. And that's where VMware Tools is nice to have installed. Now, if you want to install VMware Tools, it's pretty easy to do. You just right-click on your virtual machine and go into Install VMware Tools. It is going to mount within the virtual machine the VMware Tools to this virtual DVD drive. And you can click on this, and then you can run the setup. It's going to be straightforward. If it prompts you with any options, you'll just click next, 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 accept any of the terms, and you'll be good to go. And let's see, here it is. Next, 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 and good to go. Now there's going to be a restart with this as well, so just be mindful of that. I like doing it right away when I first get a system up and running. If I want VMware Tools on it, I'll install it right away, just so that way I don't have to worry about a random restart down the road. And another cool thing with VMware Tools as well as it'll make your screen resolution dynamic. So if I move this to be larger, it's going to adjust the Windows 11 resolution to be larger as well. You don't have to manually go and futz with things. It makes it a lot easier. So here is the restart that I warned you about. I'm going to click on that and it's going to reboot the VM. Now you're going to see that this is going to reboot, I would say a decent amount faster than in previous attempts. And the big thing you're going to see is that when I sign into this, after I enter in my password and click the sign in button, it's going to be fast. I'm willing to bet I'll be in my virtual desktop within a matter of like single-digit seconds. So let me sign back in. And let's see how long it takes. Click the arrow. 1001, 1002, 1003, 1000, yeah, like 3.5 seconds. Like that's pretty good performance. This is stock Windows 11, so we don't have Chrome or any other tools in here. It's just all the Microsoft tools, but you can go to town, you can play around with the virtual machine, and it is pretty much good to go. Now, the cool thing again with the VMware Tools is that if I did want to copy something from my host computer into the virtual machine, I can do that. So let me just drag my text file from my desktop of my real computer to the desktop of my virtual computer, and it's here. It's sitting right up here on the screen, which is cool. I'm trying to get out of this stupid Edge setup. And there it is right there. And I can copy things back and forth. So it's really nice for like quality of life, but you do want to be mindful of just some of the security risks that you are bringing by installing these tools and just leaving them kind of unconfigured in the default state. Now, when you're done with your virtual machine, you can leave it running if you want, but as you're going to note, if I were to bring up my task manager of my physical computer, not my virtual machine, my physical computer, you're going to see that this virtual machine is sucking up like a decent amount of resources. So this is the task manager for my physical host computer, and you can see I'm using like half my memory. So generally, when you're not using these, you want to shut them down or suspend them because they're going to be sucking up resources. And even if you have extra overhead on your computer, I'm looking at the UPS down here, and my computer is using like 300 watts, which is a lot of power for it essentially just idling and recording a video. So it is good to turn these things off. And there's two ways you can do that. You can power it off just by shutting down the guest or just pulling the plug. That's this hard button, this power off right here. That's that option right there. Or you can suspend it. Suspending is kind of like hibernate. So if you do this, it's going to shut it down, but it's going to leave everything in its current state. And this can be convenient because if you're in the middle of something and you just need to, turn this thing off because you want to run other software, or you're leaving for the weekend or whatever it might be, you can suspend it and then come back in another day and unsuspend it, and everything is going to be open just as you had left it. So the play button's still green, and then as you can see, when it's fully suspended, it just turns into the pause button, and you can see a snapshot of what was running on the desktop. And you'll notice the RAM that was being consumed in my host computer has dropped off quite a bit. When you're ready to resume it, you hit the power button, and it brings you right back into that current state. If you want them, you can just completely turn it off. Out of habit, I generally just will shut them down because I like turning things on and having it kind of brought back up in a clean slate. And the last thing I'll mention with this video is if you ever want to take any snapshots, which is an excellent way to back up your virtual machines in its existing state, you just right click and say snapshot, and you can take a snapshot. And snapshots are really helpful. So back when I was a full-time IT sysadmin, what I would do is I did a lot of image development for our lab computers. So typically I would build out a configuration, either using VMware Workstation or some other tool, and then I would add it and modify it as time went on. Maybe someone needed an additional piece of software, or a piece of software needed to get updated. I could test out a lot of different things by maintaining these set of snapshots, versus if this was like a physical computer I'm tweaking and maintaining, I'd have to manually install things. And if I make a mistake, I'd have to go back and reset the whole thing. And a good example of this is all the time, where I was working, we had instructors that would ask for, a certain version of Visio or Visual Studio or some specific piece of software, and that software would break other software on the system because we had so many instructors using these computers. And that happened all the time, and it's always a pain in the butt to have to go back through and fix things when it was broken. And what's cool about this is I could take a snapshot of kind of like a base Windows install or my base computer install, and then I can make a change, and if that change completely messed up the system, I could roll it back. It makes it really easy to step back to previous configurations. You don't have to reinstall Windows and reinstall all these apps and reconfigure them. You just gotta essentially roll back to a previous snapshot. These snapshots do consume a little bit of space, but it's not too bad. And if you wanted to revert back to it, you would just revert back to your snapshot. You can have as many snapshots as you want. You can delete them when you're done with them. Pretty straightforward. So I'll leave the video as it is for now. If you have any questions or feedback, please feel free to leave a comment. And of course, as always, like the video, subscribe to my channel. Definitely appreciate that stuff. And I'll see you around for the next one.